All right, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We've got a few quick announcements this morning before we get into the science sessions. First thing, first thing, real quickly, if you haven't signed up for a side meeting tomorrow afternoon and you want to attend one, please register ahead of time. The public side meetings, the first one is Untangling the Marine Food Web, Bridging Knowledge Gaps to Better Understand Forage Taxa in the Mid-Atlantic Bight. Second one is Floating Offshore Wind Technology, Fisheries Interactions, Limitations and Opportunities for a Path Forward. The third session is a meeting of the Collision Risk Modeling Working Group, which is open whether or not you have attended the first meeting of that group last year. Fourth public meeting is the Offshore Wind and Wildlife Technology Mini Tech Surge, which is a discussion focused on driving innovation in offshore wind technology. If you go to this QR code, you can register for those sessions. We are asking folks to register ahead of time because the room spaces are limited. There are also two closed meetings. Project WOW is having an external advisory board meeting, and there is a surf clam stock enhancement meeting. So if you are one of the people attending those, you should have information on when and where to go already for those. If you don't, contact your meeting organizers. For the open meetings, as I said, please register on the conference website as this QR code and don't just show up tomorrow. Second, a few quick logistics things. If you haven't yet downloaded the conference app, please do so. You can use this QR code so that you can ask questions during sessions. At lunch today, and this was true yesterday, it's true all week, there's food in the poster session room as well as in Ballroom A. So if the line in Ballroom A is getting long, feel free to head over to the fishbowl where the poster session is, and there's a full food set up there as well. The poster session tonight is going to be shorter. It's 5 to about 6:30, 6:45. Half of the posters had someone standing at them yesterday. The other half will have authors standing by them today. So please do come back by, have a drink, learn a little more at the poster session before you head out for dinner. A quick reminder, if you're in Ballroom B today and it's getting crowded, because it is a much smaller room than this one, we also have those sessions streaming live on the third floor in rooms 302 and 306. There's screens, audio set up. The rooms are set up classroom style with tables. So especially if you're trying to get a little work done between sessions, it could be a really good option. Feel free to head up there if you want to listen in on what's going on Ballroom B. And obviously with the app, you can ask questions from anywhere while you're following the session. Okay, last announcement of the morning, which is very exciting. I know some of you got a sneak peek at this at the poster session last night too, but the New Jersey Offshore Wind Research and Monitoring Initiative is very pleased to announce the opening of a request for proposals today. Working in conjunction with the New Jersey Sea Grant Consortium, the RMI is making $4.75 million available for research projects focused on furthering ecologically responsible offshore wind development. Focus areas for the RFP include non-extractive survey methods, technological data innovations, fishery sustainability, and socioeconomic impacts, as well as offshore wind noise impacts on marine wildlife, benthic ecosystems and primary productivity, bird and bat risk exposure, and other topics consistent with the RMI high priority research needs. Important deadlines include August 28th for a letter of intent and October 9th for proposals. And details on the RFP can be found in the New Jersey Sea Grant Consortium website, and again, there's a QR code there for you. So very exciting news there. And I think with that, we've got about 3 minutes before the next session start. So if you're in Ballroom B, feel free to head over. Stay here if you're in the auditorium for the Hydrodynamics session. And we look forward to a great day today. Thank you.
So when someone is done, you can click out of this one and then they're all up here, and so just pull the next one up.
Okay.
That's great. Yeah. I don't know what this. Oh, that was the jazz music.
So his or
Yep.
Good morning, everyone. Want to come in and grab a seat. We'll get started on this morning's session, which is Hydrodynamics and Ecosystem Linkages. We've got a great lineup of 5 speakers this morning, all queued up by our plenary speaker, Glenn Gorkowitz, yesterday. So we'll start off with Kaustubha Raghukumar, who will be talking about From Wind to Whales, Potential Hydrodynamic Impacts of Offshore Wind on Nantucket Shoals Region Ecosystems.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm here on behalf of the committee that was formed by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine to present our findings on potential hydrodynamic impacts of offshore wind development on the Nantucket Shoals region ecology. This study was sponsored by BOEM, and the study was publicly released in October last year. And for those of you who are interested in a hard copy of the report, I placed a box full of hard copies by the front desk there, so feel free to grab a copy when you get a chance. All right. No. This worked earlier this morning when I tested it. Maybe just use the arrow. No? Froze up.
Try one more time. definitely working.
Okay, that's working. Okay.
Let's see, that's working now too.
All right, great.
Sorry.
Thank you. All right, and the whole list of committee members are listed on this slide here. And the study was led by Dr. Eileen Hoffman from Old Dominion University. And a couple of members of the committee are at this conference. I see Doug sitting out there. Josh is in the other room. And I also saw one of the peer reviewers walk in, Chris Orphanides. So feel free to grab any of us to talk more. All right, the objective of the study was to understand potential effects of fixed bottom wind turbine generators and the resulting effects on hydrodynamics and the resulting effects on marine mammals, specifically zooplankton species that serve as prey for the North Atlantic right whale. The study consisted of a literature review, public information gathering sessions, and an evaluation of the applicability of existing hydrodynamic models to the Nantucket Shoals region, following which a set of recommendations were made on measures needed to detect and assess changes in hydrodynamics due to interactions with WTGs that may impact the surrounding ecosystem. All of this was done in 6 months, as Glenn mentioned yesterday morning. For the purposes of this study, we should clarify that the Nantucket Shoals region is defined as a geographic area that encompasses 9 offshore wind lease areas, and it's situated to the and these offshore wind lease areas are situated to the west of Nantucket Shoals per se. The Nantucket Shoals region off the coast of Massachusetts is one of the designated areas for offshore wind farm development, and a strong reason for that is it's an area that has strong but less turbulent winds, shallow waters, and low wave heights, all of which are conducive to offshore wind development. The physical oceanographic context within which both offshore wind farm development and any potential hydrodynamic and ecological effects are to be placed is highly complex and variable. It's changing as we speak. And Glenn Gwarkowitz presented an excellent talk yesterday that set the stage on the evolving oceanography of this region. I believe Glenn's talk should be recorded, and Glenn also presented a similar talk to the committee last year, and a recording of that presentation is available on the web page for this report on the National Academy's website. The hydrodynamics of the region are driven by complex interactions among shelf break processes, seasonal stratification, bottom friction, tides, boundary layer processes, and flows over complex bathymetry. All of these processes are continuously evolving, and the evolution of which makes the establishment of a baseline or control a non-trivial task. In addition to the complex hydrodynamics of the region, the Nantucket Shoals region is now a foraging area for the North Atlantic right whale. Right whales migrate to the region to forage from winter to spring, and their prey in the surrounding region has been found to be primarily Calanus finmarchicus, a species of zooplankton, although it's been found that they do feed on other species as well. So what are the implications of this changing physical oceanographic setting for the North Atlantic right whale? Our understanding is that prey are typically advected into the region from further away by larger scale background currents, such as those shown in this slide here. And there are at least 2 different scales of processes involved. The first is larger scale regional processes which advect prey into the region, followed by which smaller scale processes tend to aggregate them into dense patches, which the right whales seem to prefer to feed on. The larger scale processes are on the order of a few kilometers to tens of kilometers. Their scale is governed by the baroclinic Rossby radius of deformation, which is the scale at which physical oceanographic processes are affected by the Earth's rotation. And examples of smaller scale processes are internal waves, for example, which Glenn mentioned last week, which some believe tend to aggregate zooplankton into dense patches. Habitat occupancy by the right whale is continually evolving, and feeding hotspots do move around. In the Nantucket Shoals, this dramatically changed since 2015. The results shown on this slide essentially show that there were no right whales observed in the region during the summer and fall seasons for the years spanning 2011 to 2015. However, that has changed since 2015, and there have been increased summer sightings of right whales in this region since then. So then the question is, what processes have changed, or what's now causing right whales to aggregate in this region? All right. So the previous slides set the physical, oceanographic, and hopefully ecological background within which any changes due to wind farms would need to be considered. There are two different effects of wind turbines on hydrodynamics. The first is the physical presence of the turbines themselves, which cause an obstruction to the flow, which results in an ocean wake behind the turbine or in the lee of the flow, where the water becomes more turbulent than the surrounding region. And secondly, as the turbines extract energy from the wind field, there is a deficit of wind energy in the lee of the wind field, which can have implications on wind-driven ocean circulation. And because of the variety of scales over which effects could potentially occur, the committee considered three different scales over which to conduct their study. The smallest scale is the turbine scale. The second largest scale is the wind energy area scale, which can encompass either a single lease area or multiple adjacent lease areas. And the third is the largest scale, which is the regional scale, which is kind of the scale over which, say, zooplankton advection can be expected to occur. And these scales do relate to say plankton ecology, as this slide shows. And we see here in this figure the scales of interactions between biological and physical processes relevant to plankton ecology. Boxes represent physical processes, the physical processes that affect plankton dynamics or distributions, such as the effect of small-scale turbulence on plankton growth and community composition, the impact of boundary layer processes on plankton dynamics and distributions, and as we go up scales, the effect of other processes such as benthic or surface boundary layer processes, or internal waves, sub-mesoscale processes, eddies, fronts, tidal, coastal mixing, all of which can tend to aggregate zooplankton into dense patches. Examples of a couple of us on the committee have so far worked on atmospheric and ocean effects from offshore wind turbines on hydrodynamics. Jeff Carpenter, who's not here, proposed this idealized model on the left, which looked at turbine scale mixing of stratification in the North Sea, where the dominant current is tidal. And he basically proposed that the rate of turbulent mixing shown by the swirls there is dependent on the structure and magnitude of background currents, stratification, and specifics of the foundation geometry, of the wind turbine generator foundation geometry. As for myself, we recently conducted completed a larger scale study on the west coast of the U.S., where we looked at the effect of wind energy extraction on upwelling, and we basically found, in our model study, we basically found both increases and decreases in upwelling vertical velocity on either side of a wind farm. But you know, from both of these studies and other studies, we do know that there are significant uncertainties in the understanding of both effects. The knowledge is limited and primarily based on modeling studies, and there's a real dearth of data to validate these models and build a greater understanding of fine-scale processes. So then the quick question is, well, what's the effect on the right whale, and what's needed to be studied to understand effects of the offshore wind farms on the right whale from a hydrodynamics perspective? So we do need to know when, how, and where, when, how, and what do right whales forage on in the Nantucket Shoals regions? What are the effects of turbines on the scales at which zooplankton aggregations occur? And what's needed to be able to tease apart the potential effects of wind turbines on zooplankton aggregations from natural climate variability. Following our literature review and public information gathering sessions, we drafted the report. As I mentioned, the report is available both online, and there are some hard copies by the reception. And key takeaways from our study is that the paucity of observations and uncertainty of the model hydrodynamic effects of wind energy development at multiple scales make potential ecological impacts of turbines difficult to predict or detect at the moment. The hydrodynamic impacts from offshore wind development in the Nantucket Shoals region is likely to be small and difficult to isolate from much larger scale climate variability induced by natural and anthropogenic sources. There are gaps. There are fundamental gaps in understanding the foraging by North Atlantic right whales in this region specifically, and this does include the very basic question of which zooplankton taxa right whales might be feeding on in this region, and how this changes seasonally. We did propose a set of recommendations for focused studies in the region, which consisted of both regional programs, regional observation programs, and efforts to choose, calibrate, and validate models across multiple scales, both physical and ecological models, to essentially answer this wind farm question. A workshop was conducted last week following our recommendations by the National Academy of Sciences. I see several folks in the audience who were at the workshop, and a summary of the workshop findings is expected to be released soon, so please keep an eye out for that. This effort would not have been possible without this long list of folks here. I do want to acknowledge BOEM once again for being a sponsor for this study. And the National Academies of Sciences staff, Kelly, Safa, Daryl, were an absolute pleasure to work with. And shown here is a list of, on the upper bullet point is a list of folks that spoke at our public information gathering sessions. And I do want to thank the peer reviewers and report review committee as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And as with other sessions here, we are going to wait until questions at the very end. So our next speaker will talk about ecosystem effects of large-scale implementation of offshore wind in the North Sea. It will be given by Luca van Duren.
Thank you very much. Okay, hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to give a talk here. We're moving from the US over the Atlantic to the North Sea in, well, I'm from the Netherlands, I'm from Deltares. There are some colleagues here from Deltares, USA. The North Sea obviously has already seen quite a development in offshore wind. So let's get started with this. The North Sea, for those who are not familiar with it, it's quite different from the coast here. This is here on the open ocean. The North Sea is an enclosed shelf sea. It's relatively shallow. There are some bits around the Norwegian Trench, about 500 meters, but the bulk is less than 70 meters deep. It's surrounded by highly developed countries, and all these countries have got high offshore wind ambitions. And it's also a sea which is in a poor ecological state in terms of water quality, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of seabed integrity. And at the moment, because of the offshore wind pressures, there's other pressures adding to this. So these are the current plans as available from the for offshore wind website. For offshore wind in the North Sea. And as you can see, the green ones are already operational. Orangey yellow ones that are in various phases of construction, etc. The dark blue ones are ones that are currently search areas for offshore wind. So in total, for 2050, the current view is that the combined countries surrounding the North Sea will have deployed by then 300 gigawatts. We talk gigawatts these days, we don't talk megawatts anymore, only if we're talking about individual turbines. So if you put that many individual turbines in the sea, you can expect serious implications. Thankfully, previous speakers, Kaus and also the keynote speaker yesterday, have already introduced the subject of stratification. Stratification is the fact that layers of water with different densities float on top of each other and have limited interaction. And what these offshore wind farms do is they tend to relax stratification due to the interaction with the currents. That means that you not only have the possibility that nutrients from deeper waters are welled up to the surface, which might boost primary production, but also, depending on the area where you are, it can also bring fine sediment up into the top layers, which would reduce light availability and therefore reduce primary production. So where you are really depends on what the effect is likely to be. This has already shown in the field by actually co-workers of Jeff Carpenter. This is a paper from Jens Vleuten from from Hamburg University. And what they have done is, let's see, does this work? Yeah. This is, top is salt, this is temperature, and the bottom is the density anomaly in a German wind farm. What they've done, they've sailed transects through a wind farm, and what you see is in and around the wind farm, like here, this is the location of the wind farm, the density anomaly is a lot less, so you have less stratification in that particular area. Now, if you start messing about with stratification in your system, then you can have a serious impact on your whole of your ecosystem functioning. So the way we are looking at this, or the way we're working on this, is using numerical models. You cannot measure, unfortunately, what's not there yet, and we still want to get a bit of a feel for what's going to happen in and around 2030 when we have deployed 300 gigawatts. So it's a model which is covering like much more than just the North Sea. It goes out really quite far into the Atlantic. The central part of the North Sea, certainly close to the Dutch coast here, this part has got a resolution of about half a nautical mile. If you're far out in the Atlantic, the resolution of the model is 4 nautical miles. It covers hydrodynamics, but is directly online coupled to fine sediment dynamics and to ecology and water quality. The water quality and ecology module includes the dynamics of nutrients, the dynamics of fine sediment, the reduction of light due to the presence of either algae or fine sediment. It has phytoplankton growing in there. If you want, you can have seaweed growing in there as well, macroalgae. You have grazers in there. You can have the grazers grow explicitly in using dynamic budget models, so DEB models. And just to show you what the hydrodynamic model is capable of, this is really one of the state-of-the-art models that we have at the moment to predict stratification. So this is from a location in the central North Sea. I don't see that point anymore, it's not very visible. But this point here, it's an area which is seasonally stratified in the North Sea, and what you see in the graph below, the red ones are measurements from that station. It's one of the few stations in the North Sea where we have good measurements of temperature at top and bottom, and the blue line is the model. So that does a pretty good job. Now, this is the scenario I'm going to present to you. It's a scenario not for 2050, but it's roughly what we think is going to be there in 2040. So we're focusing on the Dutch wind farms because, yeah, I'm from the Netherlands and I'm paid by the WOZEP group, which is Dutch government. But we do take all the foreign wind farms into account as well. So for the Dutch wind farms, this particular layout is taking care of roughly 50 gigawatts for just the Netherlands. Now, the ambition is to go in 2050 to 72, so this is still well below what the ambitions are. And for the rest of the wind farms in the North Sea, where it's a total of about 200 gigawatts. So it's still, what you see here is still below the current ambitions. Right, that's what I've already said. Well, these are the first results, simply the hydrodynamics, and this is on the currents. What these wind farms, of course, do is slow the water down. So what you see on the left-hand side is a picture of the residual currents in the North Sea, and on the right-hand side, you see what the difference is between the situation with and without wind farms. So blue means that you have a slowing down of the currents, and this is not the peak tidal currents, but this is the residual currents, and this is in the order of magnitude of centimeters per second, so it is quite significant. So you will also, apart from maybe stratification things, you'll get a different distribution of nutrients in your environment. Looking at stratification, not a whole of the North Sea is stratified. There is the red bits that you see here, that's areas with very strong seasonal stratification, but there are also areas that you see in dark blue that are rarely stratified or maybe occasionally under calm periods or even never stratified. Close to the coast, this picture here is temperature stratification. Close to the coast, of course, there are a lot of areas with riverine inputs where you have, okay, yeah, thank you. I'll speed up. Right, so this is the impact on temperature stratification. So in the south, you don't see anything because that's an area which is nearly permanently mixed, so extra mixing doesn't mix more. But you do see in the areas that are regularly stratified or even seasonally stratified, you see significant impacts, up to 60% less stratification in some of these areas in the German Bight. The one I would like to pay a bit more attention to is this one here. That's a search area. It's in an area which is really strongly seasonally stratified. So even in summer, storms do not break up stratification in that area. So looking at the hydrodynamics, you can see that there's potential for impacts, but you want to know that that is actually true. Colleagues of mine have been tagging onto a Belgian field campaign in a Belgian wind farm, which is in an area which is not really very stratified. What they did was detailed measurements behind one of the turbines, and what they did was they sailed in a zigzag pattern through the wake of the turbine, looking at temperature, at velocities, etc. And this is what they see is basically what Jeff already predicted, Jeff Carpenter, is that you see in the first transect, which was done during the day, you see in that wake behind the turbine, you see cooler water and you see more saline water. So that's a clear indication that there's water mixed up from the seabed. The second transect, you don't see that so much in the temperature, but that was done at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, and it was during a very warm period. Normally this area wouldn't be, it's not actually stratified, it's a bit of a gradient. We'd love to get more measurements from areas which are properly stratified. Now what does this do with, for instance, fine sediment? Now the left-hand picture is what fine sediment in the top layer of the water column is normally in during the year, so that's quite variable. On the right hand, you again see the scenario minus the reference situation without any wind farms. So you see in most wind farm areas, you see significant increase of fine sediment in the top layer. Now have a look at that big blob in the central. So this part, that's that seasonally stratified site. it is really quite a difference if you look at an annual average, what you just showed, or if you look at like a film, if you do that throughout the year. This is in February, you see a big increase in fine sediment, but come April, when stratification sets in 5 days' time, you lose all the fine sediment in the top layer, which means that all through summer, you don't have any problem with extra fine sediment in the top layer when most of the algae are growing. So this is actually what you get when you look at primary productivity. Most wind farms show either a negative or very little impact on primary production. So certainly the German Bight is one of the areas where I'm most worried about, where you have very negative impacts. But here, this big area, which has that seasonal stratification, you have an increase. Well, you also see in all these areas that you have a delay in all in the occurrence of the spring bloom. This has an impact, of course, on the zooplankton. These are, at the moment, still column models, not full 3D models, but the column models have used boundary conditions from the 3D model. The area that I just showed you with a very negative impact has got much less zooplankton, but more distributed throughout the water column. And the area with that search area 6-7, which I pointed out in the central, has relatively more zooplankton, also better divided over the water column. Now, you don't only have zooplankton, but you also have a lot of extra grazers in terms of mussels, etc., in the top layers of the water. So what that's going to do eventually is very difficult to predict. So it's really difficult to predict what's going to happen to your higher trophic levels. What we do see is that the impact of wind farms differs depending on your location. So if you're in a seasonally stratified location like all the green bits there, the impact is completely different from if you're in a coastal location or in one of the regions of freshwater influence. The impacts for the higher trophic levels are unclear, and this approach is probably useful for other similar areas. So I think I'm just on time. Oops.
All right, thank you, Luca. That was excellent. All right, so our next speaker, will be Cormac Booth, and he will be speaking about integrating offshore wind, wildlife, and fish, the predators and prey around renewable energy developments, the prepared projects.
Great, thank you. Morning, everyone. Thanks, Doug. Yeah, so thank you. So this presentation is about a project which you might think about as kind of the UK equivalent to the WOW project. Because we're from the UK, we have a very dry name, prepared. US, it's WOW, offshore wind. As said in the introduction, that acronym stands for Predators and Prey Around Renewable Energy Devices. It is funded by the Crown Estate, the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Programme, which is running through to, I think, the end of 2028. Our project currently runs through into kind of spring 2026. And you can hopefully see the logos along the bottom here. Just like WOW, this is a big consortium, huge collaborative effort involving a large number of research groups. Oh, sorry. So the ultimate aim of this work is to try and reduce uncertainty in the consenting process and also get a better understanding of basically how offshore wind farms may positively and negatively impact the environment at different levels. The focus there, as you can see on the left, is by splitting this up into looking at predators, so thinking about marine mammals, and principally we're focusing in on harbour seals, grey seals, and harbour porpoises. And then seabirds as predators, black-legged kittiwakes, guillemots, razorbills, puffins are kind of some of the core species that we're focused on. And then really focusing on the prey as really thinking about it as an energetic resource in some respects, thinking about it as the common currency that links, no matter which predators you're working on, they ultimately need the energy, the prey, the calories that are flowing through the ecosystem. And so that's kind of a core element of this work. The outcomes, like I say, are to try and reduce consenting permitting risks. Improve post-consent monitoring, and by that I mean once projects have consent, that they are focusing in on really targeted questions that are actually moving the next consenting cycle forward. Number 3 there, like I said, evaluating the positive and negative impacts of offshore wind. For marine mammals, the construction period is of concern. I'm a marine mammal ecologist by training, but then you have 25 years of subsea infrastructure, and it's important to understand those impacts. Ultimately, working with stakeholders to try and ensure there's confidence in impact assessments. Hopefully that will also lead to better planning, and then trying to better integrate with fisheries and improve ecolocation. This is, like I say, it's a £5 million project with £11 million in in-kind contributions from developers. So I'm going to try and whistle through this in the next 10 minutes. I'll very quickly summarize the data collection and then take you through some marine mammals and construction challenges, and then move into kind of the operational phase. So I'll step through each of these different factors. So the project is focused on the UK, and all of the field work that we're doing is in the northeast of Scotland, working on 5 different wind farms that are at different stages. So 2 of them are operating, 2 are under construction, and 1 is actually just finished construction relatively recently. And this schematic just kind of lays out the different elements and how they fit together. I'm not going to go through it in detail, other than to say that I think that final work stream, dissemination, it's really maybe an underrepresented need in our industry, which is to ensure good dissemination and then how you promote the uptake. It's great to produce more science, but it's about how that gets taken up into decision making and planning. So in terms of the data collection, which I'll very, very briefly summarize. So on the fish side, we have acoustic surveys, acoustic telemetry, trawls, stereo BRUVs, so underwater cameras that are baited, and fish traps. For marine mammals, we're using passive acoustic monitoring for harbor purposes, and then tagging harbor seals. And we have existing data sets from the Sea Mammal Research Unit on grey seals. And then on seabirds, we've got breeding colony counts, vessel surveys, and telemetry. And then we are also trying to integrate all of this, as I'll describe in a little bit more detail later, into the kind of big so what of it all, focusing on kind of population modeling. And that's mostly focused on the interim PCOD model, which is for 5 different marine mammal species, the DPONS model, which is just for harbor purposes, and then the seaboard model, which is for an array of seabird species. So diving in on marine mammals and construction, this schematic on the left shows 4 different wind farms in the Moray Firth. Beatrice was built in 2018, Moray East was built in 2020, Moray West just concluded a few months ago, and Caledonia is in the permitting process at the moment. And I'm presenting data collected from Moray West, so at the tail end of last year. And this was using passive acoustic loggers to monitor harbor porpoise occurrence through the piling program. On the left of the 2 panels that have just shown up, the pin piles from 2018 were from Beatrice, and what you have there is the deterrence function, so distance from piling on the x-axis, and then the probability of a response from porpoises on the y-axis. And what you can see, hopefully, with the difference between the left panel and the right panel is 10-meter unabated monopiles, so significantly larger infrastructure that's being installed, but possibly with a different frequency component into it. And what we're seeing is quite a different pattern, and these results are kind of hot off the press just from 2 weeks ago. And so we're trying to now work through the many different reasons why those might be, what are explaining why we're seeing these different patterns, why we're seeing, based on what this suggests, is that harbor porpoises are responding less to 10-meter unabated monopiles compared to pin piles. And so we're trying to go back and critically assess to make sure we understand what are the factors that are driving that. Moving on to kind of the common currency here, presenting some work using stereo BRUV cameras. And we deploy these close to a number of operational wind farms, close actually to the foundations. So we're deploying them 30 meters, 500 meters, and then outside the wind farm entirely. And we're trying to better understand what is happening when you install these foundations on the seabed. Are they attractive? Is it increasing production? We're primarily focused in on that aggregation question, and I'll show you the results of what we've seen. BRUVs can provide relative abundance, relative diversity and community composition, and then from my perspective, again, as a marine mammal biologist and interested in energetics, they can also give us individual length measurements, which is a really unique feature that we don't get from all survey methodologies. And so with that, what we've been doing is converting those length measurements that we've been getting to well-established length-weight relationships, And then because with the BRUV data, we're getting estimates of abundance within the very small area that the BRUVs are sampling benthically, that allows us to get to biomass estimates. We're also able to consider the energetic content, so kind of the nutritional content or the calories available in these prey items. And so that also means we can think about this in terms of presenting estimates of energy that are available to predators. So kind of when you're thinking about, well, what difference does that make if there are some fish present, we can think about this more in terms of, well, what would that mean if you're a porpoise or a seal or a seabird species, but in this case we're sampling benthically, so it's less relevant for seabirds. The bomb calorimetry part is a bit of a gap in the community. There is information on there, but there's not a huge amount in terms of for many of the species that are relevant for marine mammal and seabird predators. And so a big part of the Prepared project has been an extensive bomb calorimetry campaign. It's led by Pip Wright, who's a PhD student at the University of St Andrews. So far, since Prepared started 2 and a bit years ago, we've set up the lab, and she's processed over 700 samples, and we've got 360 new energy density estimates for 22 different prey species that are prey species of marine mammals or seabirds between the ranges of 7 and 47 centimeters. And these are just some results that Pip kindly provided from her PhD for haddock and herring, but we have them for a whole range of species. And so this is pretty exciting because it gives us some of the building blocks we need to sort of explore this in a bit more detail. And so I'm just going to show you the results of combining the BRUV data that we collected with the energy data. So these are the Moray Firth wind farms that I showed you earlier. And basically the most common species seen were haddock, flatfish. It was basically common dab and place, but they were hard to distinguish with the orientation of the camera. So we just grouped to flatfish, and then poor cod as well. And then this plot shows the energy in kilojoules, so basically what matters to the animal. The blue is close to the turbine, so within 30 meters of the turbine. The kind of olive color in the middle is within the wind farm site, but in between the foundation, so about 500 meters away. And then the kind of yellowy green color on the right is reference sites that are taken outside the wind farm. And so basically what we're seeing here is that we are seeing significantly greater biomass at the sites, but that also plays out into significantly greater total energy being observed on these BRUV sites close to the foundations compared to sites within the wind farm but further away. And what's interesting here is that the levels of energy I'm showing you here, if it was just these animals were only foraging in the tiny area that the BRUV has sampled, that's enough to sustain a porpoise, 3 porpoises for a day, or a couple of grey seals, a couple of harbour seals. So it's a significant amount of energy in a very, very small area. So on the right there, I've shown you that each BRUV monitors about 0.03 kilometres squared. Bole, the Beatrice site, has 84 turbines. Moray East has 100 turbines. And so we're interested to better understand what's going on here. Is this aggregation of prey to the turbines, or is this an increase in production, but also how this scales across different foundations? Moving on now here. So this is looking at some of the seabird work that we're doing, again, trying to integrate with the kind of prey component. And what we're looking at is a series of different questions that operate at different scales. So on the left, thinking at the regional scale, trying to understand for the seabird species of interest, what drives long-term range, long range and long-term movement. And then in the middle, showing some prey distribution models that have been basically ground-truthed and using data collected offshore around a number of under construction wind farms. Thinking about the question of, well, what drives foraging activity on a trip? And this is where also the telemetry and vessel-based surveys are tying in. And then looking also at a localized level, so trying to integrate actual acoustic surveys to look at prey school detections and understand, well, which fish schools are they actually foraging on, again, so that we can make sure we're tying these things in and we do understand that we're not generalizing too much and understanding in a bit more detail what's going on. And then, again, moving to maybe the really big picture of trying to understand, well, what do we do with all this information? This is all new evidence, and it's great to improve the evidence base, but we need to have some thoughts about what we're trying to do with it. So this shows a schematic for the seaboard model, which is a seabird cumulative effects model that Kate Searle and others at the UKCEH have developed. And so these are just a couple of examples within the prepared project of what we're using those information for. So for example, we've got evidence of joint prey and seabird distributions, and we're monitoring how those are changing post-construction. The Seagreen and NNG wind farms are now, most of the construction is done. Seagreen's fully operational. As I've mentioned about the energetic estimates, we've got better information on prey and the energy, and so those are going to feed into the seaboard model, which would be an improvement. And then also integrating new approaches for adding biological realism to the foraging tracks with the telemetry data and extensive programs carried out off the east of Scotland. We're doing the same thing on the marine mammal side. So with the interim PCOB model, which I mentioned for 5 species, something that we're just ramping up, and I would love to talk to developers about, particularly if you have projects that we're interested in the North Sea, is trying to look at what are the impacts predicted at the impact assessment stage, and then how does that compare to reality. I've listed a couple of the factors here, things that very often change between the consent and the installation, the number of foundations, the size of the foundations, how long it took to install them, the hammer energy, and so on. So there's a number of factors that we're looking at here to try and refine and improve some of these cumulative impact assessments. We're also exploring, because we have a new version of one of the IPCOD models, how we can integrate some of those energetic information in as well, to try and refine what the model predicts. It's been said a few times in various ways, but I think one of the things that's really important to consider is that the confounding factors of everything else that's going on makes it very, very challenging to actually detect and pick up the patterns and whatever's changing that is a consequence of offshore wind. This project's been affected by storms where seabird vital rates are being materially impacted, and so we're seeing changes in seabird populations as a result of storms. Also avian flu, where populations quite aside from offshore wind development are being negatively impacted, and so again, trying to tease out offshore wind in the context of that is challenging. And then this map on the right just shows the sea surface temperature anomaly off the east coast of Scotland since 2014. There's been lots of discussion about marine heat waves and five-day events and things like that, but you can see here that we have anomalies that have been going on for a very, very long time, and trying to tease out what is the effect of offshore wind against a very challenging and shifting baseline is definitely not straightforward. So just to wrap up, we are in our final field season right now. We are in talks with OEC about hopefully extending the program, because we think there's a lot. We've spun up a huge team to work on this, and it would be great to continue. So we're hoping to do that. Please check out the OEC website. I've got a QR code in the next slide which you can look at. But the take home here is I think there's huge opportunities for knowledge exchange. There's lots of people here who are working on similar questions and coming at them from different angles. It would be really great to talk more, because I think we're collecting useful data. UK offshore wind is a little further ahead in terms of the number of wind farms we actually have in the water. So there could be really interesting knowledge exchange and really beneficial for the community as a whole. So I'd really appreciate that. And if you want any more information, please come to me and I'll connect you with people in the team who actually can answer your questions. It won't be me. So yeah, just to finish in saying thanks very much. Please check out the website. There's lots of information available there. Thanks very much for your time.
All right, thank you. So our next speaker is Tom Shyka. He'll be talking about streamlining integration and distribution of metocean data from offshore wind operations for marine stakeholders. And the mouse arrow is gone. Oh, there it's back. Wait, where'd it go? There it's back. Yeah, that mouse arrow had disappeared. It's back. It just needed you here. So for some reason, the presenter slides are not coming up.
I can't fix that now, but
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. So I am going to be presenting on a new project that's going to be focused on sharing, providing access to meteorological and oceanographic or metocean data that's going to be collected in and around offshore wind farms. I realize now after Cormac's presentation that we need to come up with a cool name for this project, or maybe an understated name, but so we'll work on that. But this project is funded by the U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System, which I'll provide a little bit of information about. It's being led by Naracus and Maracus, along with our respective data management partners at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute and RPS Tetra Tech. It's not advanced. Is it not going to advance on my? Sorry. I can just use. It's not advancing here. But
It's very strange.
I can just look up. It advanced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
I'll just. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to talk about it.
That's all right. Oh, now this is not advancing. Let me see if I can use. So now the remote is not advancing these slides.
Sorry, everyone.
That's all right.
Let's see. Oh, the mouse disappeared too. Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
We lost
Thank
it.
you. Okay, so back to the U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System, or IUS. It's a partnership of 17 federal agencies. It's got a mission to produce, integrate, and communicate high-quality ocean, coastal, and Great Lakes information that meets the safety, economic, and stewardship needs of the nation. The IUS program is managed, coordinated out of an IUS office, which is in NOAA's National Ocean Service. The on-water, in-water implementation of the Integrated Ocean Observing System is managed by 11 regional associations. Naracus and Maracus are two of those regional associations, and you can see those on this map up here. The regional associations are partnerships of academic institutions, private industry, NGOs, and work closely with state agencies and federal agencies within our regions. The regional associations employ a variety of technologies and models for the ocean observing, including buoys, gliders, high-frequency radar systems, other coastal sensors. And all of that data is managed, and there's access provided, standardized access provided through standardized data management systems. Our data management systems go through a federal certification process to ensure that we're meeting data management standards that are set by NOAA. So here is a picture of a buoy, metocean buoy that's supported by Naracus, operated by the University of Maine. That buoy is transmitting data at least every hour, if not more frequently. And then you can get access to that data through various products and services. And up here you see One of the Nearacus products, our Mariner's Dashboard, which provides access to the latest data from all of our buoys and other federal buoys that are operated by NOAA's National Data Buoy Center or a CDIP program. Behind the scenes there, or in between that buoy and that presentation of the data, is the cyber infrastructure. And the cyber infrastructure you can think of as the hardware, the software, the networks, the data, and the people and processes that allow that flow of data. So what I've depicted here in this schematic is 2 regional association buoys operated by different institutions that are transmitting data. Then that data goes through a standardized QA/QC process. That data is organized and formatted, and standardized metadata is developed for that. So that data can then easily flow and repeatably flow to key customers like NOAA's National Data Buoy Center, so that this data can be available to National Weather Service forecasters, can be available to NOAA models, could be available to the models that might be used, to were talked about in the first presentation. It'll be available to a variety of other products and applications. And you can learn more about those standards through that link that I provide on this page. And so I did want to highlight sort of the value of delivering this data in real time. It is really critical for marine safety and navigation, for disaster preparedness and response. I think in Glenn's keynote presentation, he talked about the importance for commercial fisheries. The most number of people using the data from the Nearacus buoys are commercial fishers. They're looking at that data every day, sometimes multiple times a day, to make decisions about where they're going to fish and whether they're going to go out. Certainly, real-time data delivery is valuable to scientific research and innovation. Can support adaptive management. It's beneficial to public awareness, and it makes a really compelling educational tool as well. So there's a lot of reasons to get this data delivered in real time. So with the development of offshore wind, there's more and more metocean sensors and buoys that have been deployed and that will be deployed. And these metocean measurements support the full life cycle of the wind farm development. There's a recent paper, Bailey and Friedman, that I think describes this really well. However, because there are different projects, the management or access to this data is inconsistent. So that potentially means that data gets siloed, it's hard to get to. Over the long term, potentially you risk data loss, and the full benefits of that data are not realized. Nearacus and Nearacus have worked with various developers and who are interested and who have shared data, so there's definitely interest from the industry in sharing this data. There are now recommendations and some federal requirements to collect and share oceanographic data, specifically with regards to wind turbine radar interference mitigation, or WTRIM, so that turbines can interfere with high-frequency radars, and this is a system that all of the IUS regional associations support. And so to mitigate that, NOAA's requiring developers to collect current data and wave data and share that data. So where can all of that data go so it can be available? That's what we're going to be working on. So I'm going back to this schematic, and you can see those 2 regional association buoys that are sending data through our cyber infrastructure, or in IUS we call it a data assembly center. And now I've added 2 offshore wind buoys where the data is being transmitted, it's being formatted, it's just being formatted in a different way. There may or may not be metadata available with it. And so then what happens there, some of that data just isn't available, or if you want to get that data to a certain product or to a model, maybe there needs to be some reprocessing, reformatting of that data. And that doesn't scale very well. So what we're going to be doing in this project is enhancing, expanding the cyber infrastructure that we already have so we can more effectively bring in data from these additional buoys and sensors, get that data run through our standardized QA processes, get it formatted, develop the standardized metadata so that more of that data can flow to key customers like the National Weather Service, like the U.S. Coast Guard, can get to commercial fishermen in near real time. So again, our overall goal is to ensure that metocean data collected in and around the wind farms are effectively managed and available to all stakeholders. We'll be doing a lot of engagement throughout this project to talk to data providers and data users. That's going to help drive how we expand, improve our cyber infrastructure. We're going to be going through a testing cycle with various use cases, so working with actual data and data providers to make sure that our system can work for them. Eventually, we'll be providing documentation and training, and then ultimately transitioning kind of the prototype cyber infrastructure into a national operational system. Here is an overview of our timeline. So year 0 is everything before right now, before the project officially starts. We've been doing a lot of engagement with data providers, again, to understand what data they have available, sort of their processes for sharing data. We've started to evaluate our cyber infrastructure. What do we need to improve to make this more efficient? What can we automate? This first year, starting right now, we're going to expand engagement like opportunities like this. We'll be identifying several use cases, so working with developers, other data providers that are going to kind of drive the development of the cyber infrastructure. Year 2, we'll be testing and refining the cyber infrastructure with additional use cases, continuing engagement. The third year of our project will be hardening that infrastructure, finalizing the documentation, the training, and starting the transition of the prototype system into a national system. So just some final thoughts to wrap up. Data sharing is caring. There's a lot more data that's going to be collected in and around these offshore wind farms, and there's a lot of stakeholders can benefit from that data. It can save lives, or it can at least save some money for people. Data standards, best practices are really the key to making that data flow and move efficiently to all the different potential users of the data. And if you're collecting metocean data in and around offshore wind farms, we want to work with you. We want to get as much of that data out to stakeholders as possible. On the left side, I guess, of the slide, you're seeing some of the developers, projects, agencies, institutions that have already agreed to or are interested in sharing data with us. So if you're one of those, or if you again have metocean data that you could be shared with this project, we want to talk with you. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. So we've got one talk left in the session, and that will be by Jacquelyn Veatch. She will be talking about assessing the role of ocean currents on prey concentration from hourly to seasonal scales.
All right, today I will be talking about some of my dissertation research, which was done under the advisory of Josh Kohut at Rutgers University and in collaboration with Matt Oliver and Eric Fredge. And I will be using a lot of data from that Mariku system that Tom very nicely introduced to us. So I'm one of your user groups, so big fan of your cyber interface. Plankton distribution in the ocean is notoriously patchy, being concentrated in some areas and sparse in others. And this phenomena has led to the emerging theory of the food paradox, where the average distribution of prey in the ocean is not large enough to maintain these larger upper trophic species. And so these larger animals are using these small patches of high-density prey in order to forage more efficiently, or solving that food paradox. Now, phytoplankton patchiness is in part due to advective transport by physical ocean features, and grazer patchiness is in part due to that same advection from physical ocean features, as well as their attraction to their prey source, the phytoplankton. And lastly, foragers are then attracted to grazer patches. Now, this bottom-up control on spatial ecology was coined as food web focusing by Amatsia Jenin in their 2004 paper. So the question I aim to answer is, do physical mechanisms drive spatial variability of ocean resources, helping solve that food paradox? But before I can answer this question, I first need a tool to quantify surface advective transport in the ocean. So to take a small step backwards conceptually for a moment, we can see organized transport and fluid flow in many different scenarios, such as an oil spill being moved around by coastal currents in the Gulf of Mexico, beachgoers caught in a rip current, or even this line of brash ice in the Neumayer Strait. Now, to quantify these attracting features that are creating these patterns, I'm going to use a mathematical tool known as a Lagrangian coherent structure, or LCS. Now, a Lagrangian coherent structure can turn a velocity map into scalar amounts of attraction. And so beginning with a velocity field, I first release thousands of particles into the flow fields that are pushed, swirled, and concentrated by those velocities. Now, this is done just in my code as a simulation experiment. It's a lot more paperwork to do it in the real ocean. And so from these dynamic particle trajectories, I am able to use that Lagrangian coherent structure technique to assign a scalar quantity of attraction. And here I have used a technique known as a finite time Lyapunov exponent. I tested several of these techniques and found this one works the best. And you can scan that QR code to see more details and geek out about the mathematics with me in that paper. So to get from these dynamic particle trajectories to a FTLE, I integrate over particle trajectories, comparing it to neighboring particle trajectories, looking for a ridge in a material surface where particles are converged to and then diverged along that ridge. So if you can imagine a particle starting on this side and a particle starting on this side, if we advect them forward in time, they'll both converge to this ridge and then diverge along that ridge. And so a scalar amount is assigned to that ridge based on the integrated attraction rate of that particle. So these darker colors here on the grayscale show areas of higher attraction, and those lighter colors are areas of less attraction. And what I have found in a test scenario in an Antarctic ecosystem is that along these these strong attracting features, we have seen increased phytoplankton biomass, which again you can read about in this paper here. And I have a paper in review that shows that we also see increased krill swarming presence and penguin foraging behavior around these attracting features. And so this is suggesting that these features are ecologically significant or are concentrating prey in a way that increases prey availability for foraging creatures. Now, sustained observations in the Mid-Atlantic provide a unique opportunity to look at the seasonal and interannual trends in these transport features that I believe to be ecologically significant. And so here's that Maricruz data I'll be using. It's a high-frequency radar array in the Mid-Atlantic, reaching from Cape Hatteras in the south to Cape Cod in the north. And these high-frequency radars, which are shown here on the picture on the right, and that's one me to scale how tall they are. And so these produce an hourly surface current map of the Mid-Atlantic, and I'll be using a frequency that has a 6-kilometer spatial resolution. So pretty high spatial resolution every hour, and these observations have been taken for almost 2 decades at this point. Now, the Maricruz high-frequency radar array has variable coverage, which presents a challenge to FTLE calculations, which really love smooth, rectangular, continuous data, which is not the reality in observational oceanography. And so to tackle this, I will treat each day individually. So first, I will create a contour where data is present 80% of the time just for that day. And so this picture here on the left in that red shows my 80% coverage contour. Now, within that 80% coverage, I will fill the data using a HFR-specific technique to smooth data gaps. And so now I have 24 hours of continuous coverage, and I'm trying to minimize how much data I make up with this filling technique. And so to get to my FTLE calculations, I do a 24-hour integration. So I'm following those particles for 24 hours at a time. And that means that I have one map of attracting features each day. And that's shown, again, in this figure on the left, with those darker colors being stronger attracting structures and those lighter colors being weaker attracting structures. Now, I have done the simulation experiment for a decade of time, so 2013 to 2023, and that results in 3,653 daily maps of attracting FTLE. So this video on the left here, each frame shows one day of attracting structures, and this is done in winter 2014 as an example. So you can see that the system is quite dynamic, and it changes in space and time with our inputted velocity field from those Maricou's high-frequency radars. Now, to try to wrap our head around what's happening here, I have created these plots which can look at one season at a time. And so on the right, I have plotted the percent a time where we have a strong FTLE. So those yellow colors are we more often have a strong attracting feature that season, and those blue colors are we less often have a strong attracting feature. And I've decided that my threshold for strong attracting feature is 0.1, and you can ask me more about that later in the app if you're curious. And so to kind of orient you to these types of figures, you can see that on the right, we often have strong FTLE in that southern New England or that Nantucket Shoals region. You can also see the shelf break front popping out a little bit. So the lighter gray colors are the continental shelf, and the darker gray is the open ocean. And if you imagine, I'm really bad at this pointer thing. Oh, if you can imagine the shelf break front right over the coverage there, we have more often have strong FTLE, which makes sense because those FTLE are looking for kind of those transport barriers or places where things are accumulating across a transport barrier. And in oceanography, we might see that as a strong horizontal buoyancy gradient, or what we would call a front. So using the same plotting scheme, I have now visualized a decade of data for each season. And so I have winter, spring, summer, and fall averages here. And from a quick look at these results, and again, these are very new results, they're not yet published, so I would love your feedback on these as well. In each season, we have a high occurrence of strong FTLE in that southern New England or Nantucket Shoals region. Now, in spring and summer, that area of high occurrence of strong attracting features kind of leaks and expands southwards, where we don't see that in winter and fall. And my hypothesis here is that might be because in winter and fall we see strong wind events that are uniform, and they create strong uniform wind-driven flow. And so a uniform flow is the antithesis of stretching or shrinking, which you need to have these strong attracting features. So strong uniform flow is kind of flushing out the system, not really creating these attracting structures. And you can kind of see that in the southern part of these maps, especially in winter and fall, we don't have many strong attracting structures. And we know that this area in the southern mid-Atlantic often has southward flow that is pretty uniform and strong, which we wouldn't expect to have strong attracting features there. Whereas the Nantucket Shoals region, we know to be tidally driven. And so tides, the mood doesn't change with seasons, so it makes sense if these are tidally driven attracting features that they would stay the same throughout the season. Plotted here on the top is results from Hugh Rorty's 2020 paper, which shows a mean of surface currents from 2006 to 2017 using that same Maricou's high-frequency radar array. So you can imagine those top two plots as our Eulerian perspective and those bottom two plots as our Lagrangian perspective. And like I alluded to earlier, that bottom half of this, the high-frequency radar coverage has a lot of uniform and southward flow. And that northern region, kind of southern New England and Nantucket Shoals area, has slower and kind of not as uniform flow. And that's more conducive to the stretching and shrinking that would create these attracting features. that we see in these plots here with a high occurrence of strong attracting features. Now we also see trends in variability. So here is year-to-year variability. So how different was 2013 to 2014 to 2015? We don't see a whole lot of variability, but when we do, it's in that Nantucket Shoals region, and it's more extreme in winter and fall than in spring and summer. And I'm going a little fast here, but catch me later if you want more details. So here I've plotted a within-season variability, so how different is Tuesday from Wednesday. And we see more variability in the spring and summer seasons than we do in winter and fall. Now, from Glenn's keynote speech, we know that there are a lot of decadal shifts in the Mid-Atlantic, and so we've also seen that in our FTLE results. So on the left here is plotted an average percent occurrence of strong FTLE from 2013 to 2016, and on the right we have 2017 to 2020. And we can see that there were far more higher occurrence of strong attracting features after 2017 than before, especially in that Nantucket Shoals region, which we learned from Kaus was where a lot of the whales like to hang out. And so future work, I would suggest, needs to take these results and see if the ecology is following these shifts. And now I have no evidence to claim that there is a connection between the North Atlantic right whale shift in the Nantucket Shoals region at this time and these strong attracting features. But again, I think it's a really cool opportunity for future work to see if we have some connections between these attracting features, could be concentrating prey for animals of interest to this crowd. I'll leave my summary slide up here, and a huge thank you to the high frequency radar team from Maricus who made all of these data publicly available for me to use.
All right, we'll start our Q&A session while we get all the microphones on here. So please go ahead and enter your questions in the chat on the app. This one does? Yeah. Yeah, it's on. Yep. Okay. Excellent. So let's start with this, I guess, is a question for all of you. How will impacts on stratification change between fixed bottom and floating turbines? So I don't know who wants to take on that one first. Luca?
I think that will depend very strongly, again, on the area where you are. If the floating structures, I mean, there is a large sort of structure below a floating structure, of course. If that protrudes into the picnic line, you will also have impacts on stratification. But if you are really far out at sea and the picnic line is well below the bottom of that structure, it will be a lot less. Then you will only have the impact of the chains, etc., that anchor the stuff to the seabed. So that's a big difference. But yeah, it really is location dependent, like everything is.
I would maybe just add, I think, yeah, extending on that point, that with the installation of a fixed bottom, or fixed installation, the infrastructure is a little bit simpler, whereas with floating, you've got a lot of supporting cabling through the water column, and so I suppose, depending on, I don't know in terms of what the drivers are that are changing that stratification, but there's many more elements of infrastructure throughout the whole water column with a floating installation, which might be a factor to consider.
Yeah, and then I'll answer this from the wind-wake perspective. For floating offshore wind, typically the structures are larger, and as a result, there's a larger spatial separation between the turbines, which does change the scale of the wind wake. But for a fixed WTG, the turbine is smaller. As a result, the overall regional scale of the wind wake is smaller. So there is that scale-dependent effect of the wind wake and the resulting implications for stratification.
All right, thank you. And I guess this is a question for Cormac. How comparable are these studies on stratification to the east coast of the U.S.? And if anyone else wants to jump in, Luca, is you as well, if you'd like to jump in.
So I can comment on comparability in terms of the what we know about the sites. I don't know that I can say much about stratification, so I might leave the stratification element to someone else. In terms of the sites that we're monitoring, the seas in the North Sea are slightly shallower than many of the sites that are in development off the east coast of the US, on the order of maybe kind of 7 to 15 meters shallower. So that may have some factor. The sites that I presented the BRUV data for are jacket installations, and obviously there's a myriad different ways that the fixed bottom installations are being installed, whether that's large monopiles or different jacket configurations. We did actually look at 2 sites with the BRUV data, and we don't know whether it's an age-related effect or a structure-related effect that is explaining some of the differences that we're seeing between 3 and 4 legged jacket systems. So I think we don't know for sure how well these results sort of can be transposed to other areas, but in terms of subsea infrastructure as fisheries aggregation devices, I think there's what we have found is sort of supports what's been in the literature elsewhere, which is that you put something in the sea and it doesn't have to be massive, and there will be an aggregate effect.
Yeah, I think in terms of the effects that I showed of stratification and the impact on primary production, you cannot really transpose the results very directly. The North Sea is quite different. It's an enclosed shelf sea. And in the North Sea, we're going to have 20% of the whole system, which is taken up by wind farms, and that is not what you're going to get here on the Atlantic coast. I think the approach of how to look at it can be, you can use similar techniques. What is going to be relevant here is what we saw also in the first models, for instance, on zooplankton, is not only do you have an impact on the production of zooplankton, but also on the distribution. Like in the situation with wind farms, zooplankton is much more evenly distributed through the water column. So particularly for like larger predators that seek out aggregated prey, and yeah, here the North Atlantic right whale is very relevant. I think that might be something to really look into. So the type of modelling that we apply in the North Sea, that can be applied here. The results we have cannot directly be applied here.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. Thank you. All right, Jackie. How does seasonal stratification and injections of salty slope water impact your FTLE results? And could this also explain the seasonal differences?
Yes, well, a limitation of the FTLE results is that they're confined to the dimensionality of their input, meaning that we're putting in two-dimensional data, and so the calculations are assuming two-dimensional flow, which we know the ocean is not two-dimensional. So stratification, things like stratification or those salt intrusions happen below the surface, which are blind to our high-frequency radar observations, which just measure the surface flow. So with those caveats mentioned, the stratification will does affect the shear in the water column, which basically is affecting how much the surface flows kind of feel the dynamics happening below the surface. And so I don't have data to support this, but my best guess would be that the more well-mixed columns, you're having more forcing from beneath the surface, where then you have a stratified water column that we see in this spring and summer, you'll have less forcing from beneath that mixed layer. So that also could be explaining some of the seasonal differences we're seeing in the results.
Great, thank you. And this is a question to everyone, but I think I might have Tom start off with the data there. Are there recommended sampling designs when collecting empirical data to validate hydrodynamic models at multiple spatial scales? And should these approaches be standardized across studies?
Yeah, I'm going to maybe pass it because I think the National Academy report probably covered a lot of that, the recommended designs and what should be observed. Yeah, we certainly are looking really closely at that report to inform as we expand our observing system and are considering, development of offshore wind in the Gulf of Maine and how we might need to observe and model that. I think that report.
Sure. Yeah, I can use this one here. I'm glad someone asked this question. I do have some strong feelings about this. My opinion here is when you make, it's really important to make fundamental measurements to understand, say, zooplankton aggregations, the structures of turbulence, temperature, salinity, velocities in and around the wind farms. And there's no question that those measurements need to be made. But my perspective on that is when you make measurements, say inside and outside the wind farm, it's really important to find ways, either through analytical models or numerical models, to relate what's going on say inside the wind farm to what's going on outside the wind farm. And I think that measurements need to be tailored in a way to validate numerical models so that people have confidence that in model predictions, which provide this mechanistic understanding of processes that kind of go across multiple scales.
Can I make? I have one recommendation based also on the discussion yesterday. I heard a lot of people talking about measuring phytoplankton biomass. Please start measuring primary production. Phytoplankton biomass is not always the best proxy to see what's happening in your ecosystem. For instance, if you're in a wind farm and you have a lot of grazers also on the monopiles, you get a change in grazing pressure, then what's happening in your phytoplankton biomass, I mean, that's a resultant of primary production, but also the grazing. That's not always telling you what's happening. So these days, in the past, in the distant past, measuring primary production was quite difficult. These days, there are good technologies like FRF and what have you. I'm not a specialist on that, but do measure that, as well as, of course, you can use satellite images to get good patterning images, but add that to your monitoring campaigns.
Great.
I'll just add one more thing from our perspective. And I'm repeating what was said, I think, in the RWSC talk yesterday, is as you're developing kind of the collection of this data, make sure to be thinking about the data management, data access. It's going to be important. I know there's going to be a lot of different, there should be different technologies and techniques for collecting the data, but really consider at the beginning how that data is going to be managed and access is going to be provided.
Thank you. Okay, so this is regarding the first two talks. We're back to Kaus and Luca. Are there mitigation features that can reduce hydrodynamic effects of mixing of the stratified layers, either turbine design, spacing, or whatnot? And anyone else, feel free to jump in as well.
In terms of the ocean wake. And the resulting effect of the ocean wake on stratification. I'm not sure what specific mitigation measures can be taken. I'll punt that to Luca. But in terms of the atmospheric wake effects, it comes down to the spatial scale over which the wake exists. I mentioned the baroclinic Rossby radius of deformation, if there are ways to reduce the size of the wake, say below to something that's below this baroclinic radius, then it's no longer from a dynamics perspective, it's no longer going to affect processes that are affected that are influenced by the baroclinic radius of deformation. So there's ways to adjust, say, like the density of turbines, the orientation of turbines, the length and width scales of the lease area, and occupancy of that lease area by turbines. So I think that's one way to mitigate against any atmospheric wake effects.
Yeah, okay, we have done already some modeling runs with different spacings of turbines and different layouts. One of the things that's very simple, bigger turbines that are spaced further apart do less. That's very simple. And that what does make a difference where you see sort of fine-tuning is the wake behind an individual turbine effectively scales with the diameter of the turbine, but it peters out in about a kilometre and a half, something along these lines. So it does make a difference if the spacing of the turbines is such that the wakes interfere with each other, or if they're outside of that. Like with the bigger wind turbines that we have, say the ones that are 15 megawatts or something like that, they're spaced about 2 kilometres apart, so at least the wakes there don't interfere anymore. What you can also do is the shape of your wind farm with respect to the tidal currents. We've not really looked into that, was the best thing. And what also will make a difference is whether you have multiple smaller units or one large contiguous unit. We have done some runs with, for instance, that big area in the middle of our model, which doesn't exist yet, but we've had models where the whole area was filled with turbines, or with a similar energy density where we had a big gap in the middle, and that also reduced some of the impact. So it's, yeah, all these things do work. But the bigger the better.
Yeah. Thank you.
On the ocean wake.
On the ocean wake, yeah. I was talking about the ocean wakes.
All right, we have time for maybe one more question. This one's specifically to you, Cormac. What is the response of the fisheries sector on the observed increase in fish biomass in offshore wind farms?
It's a good question. So we've done an annual knowledge exchange event. The last one was in February, and all the slides are online, so definitely check that out. And it was well attended by fisheries stakeholders. We've not had a huge amount of engagement kind of within the project with fisheries. What we know for a fact, because I and many of my colleagues are actually working on the consents of offshore wind projects as well, is we know for a fact that the fishermen are going in and fishing in between the turbines. Much of what we've seen was very close, so we've only monitored, last year only monitored within 30 metres of the turbine and then 500 metres away. The estimates I showed you for 500 metres away might be down biased by the fact that there could be fishing effort removing those fish from the sampling. We don't know, honestly. But we know that the fishermen aren't going within more than about 300 metres of the actual foundations themselves, just I think due to the complications or the risks of getting gear tangled, because it's all trawl, different types of trawl fishing going on in the area. So what we're doing this year is basically trying to understand how large that spatial effect persists. So kind of what's the shoulder at which, is it 50 metres from the turbine, is it 100 metres? How big a reef effect do we see? But so far, I would say fisheries are well integrated into the kind of consents and permitting process. We're not engaging with them too much just because we're so focused on the data collection.
Okay, great, thank you. And I invite the panelists here to go ahead into the app and answer the unanswered questions, if you could, please. But let's give a round of applause for our speakers. Excellent session, and thank you all very much. I think we have a break now.